We're in the Midway Geyser Basin. You know, we have the upper Geyser Basin where Old Faithful is. We have Midway Geyser Basin, and we have the lower Geyser Basin. Midway is this whole area right here. This trail wasn't all that popular prior to 1970 because you just knew you're going to run into grizzlies out here. I would call it Cocker Spaniel Pool because a few years ago, 2 little Cocker Spaniels got in this water. Unfortunately, people stopped, let their dog out, the mama and the pup. They both ended up in there. And of course, instant death in a pool that's near 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So they float around in there for a while, and we try to get them out, and the people are having a fit because it was their pet, and they wanted to get them out and bury them properly, and we couldn't get them because they'd float out in the middle, and how do you get them out of there? And after they get cooked so long, they fall apart. There are rules. Keep your pets on leashes, and don't get them out in the geyser area. But well, anyway, kind of not a happy story here, but tire pool. Water boils here in Yellowstone 199 degrees. Sea level 212, we're 7,200 feet above sea level, so it boils a little lower temperature. This water's not boiling, obviously, but we'll take the temperature just to get a clue as to how hot this water can be. The colors that grow in here is a bacterial mat. For years we called it algae. Then some researcher got a collecting permit, came out, took some of it back to the university, studied it. Said, yeah, there is some algae in there, but mainly it's cyanobacteria. And that's fine with us, it didn't matter. Junior high school teacher, it didn't matter to me. Bacteria, algae, single cell, small, can't see it anyway. It's 160 degrees. Now this is one you might want to even stick your fingers in. Now remember, it's 160 degrees, but your fingers are kind of cool this morning, so it doesn't feel too bad at first. But it's hot water. This spring has a name also. It's called Silent Spring. The water from all these thermal features eventually in these thermal basins runs off into the Firehole River. Now the river starts at Old Faithful. The Firehole flows for 16 miles. In the first 8 miles it warms up 25 degrees from the water that dumps into it. The upper Geyser Basin alone, the Old Faithful area, dumped 12 million gallons of water a day into that river. Down the 16 miles at Madison Junction, the Gibbon River joins the Firehole, starts the Madison River. And just before that junction is a place where this river slows down, gets very deep. People go swimming there. And we tried to eliminate that for a long time and finally gave up, and so we finally put up some board shields so you can get dressed behind them, and that's really still used. But come out here one morning, and here's a car down here, and a pup tent set up underneath the trees. People stayed there at night, and they had actually almost driven right over top of this thing, just straddled it. And when a pool stays the same level, like geyserite grows out over the pool, when it splashes, it builds a cone, like you have at Old Faithful. So it takes a long time. It takes 50 to 100 years to build an inch. And so you step on it, you break off a chunk, drive over it, you can break off hundreds of years of growth. I think they allow us 5.5 hours on this walk, and we need about 4.5. Now aspen put out a very dense root system. I mean, very extensive. It goes out a long ways from the adult tree. And then little suckers come up, and they'll grow into full-size trees just from those suckers. And that's the way aspen usually spread. So when you see an aspen stand, a lot of times you'll see all the trees look exactly alike. They're all got the same genetics because they're coming from the same root system. So, but these are all from seeds. I stopped here to show you the growth on these trees. Someone was asking about how fast they grow. You can look at this little guy, and he's pretty bushy. These are all lodgepole. Lodgepole have to have open sunlight, and you don't get fir and spruce in here until you get lodgepole growing to provide shade, because the spruce and fir want to start in the shade. So these guys are going to compete for sunlight. That guy is going to make it. This one may not. They have to outcompete each other for that sunlight. But you look, the growth here, each of these sections between, like, there's 1 year, there's 2 years, there's 3, there's 4, there's 5, and there's 6. The tree's 6 years old. Now, it probably didn't get started at the same time as this one, but notice the distance in the space here, see, 1 year's growth. Why is this one doing so much better? Well, he probably got more sunlight, might be in a better soil spot right here. But as you look over here, you'll see some trees that didn't get burned in the fire. Those are a good dense stand of lodgepole. And when you see those, they look like a telephone pole with a Christmas tree on top, because they're growing so close, and they'll be dense here another 20 years. They have to have sunlight, so it's just the top part that keeps the green on there. The rest of it gets peeled off. They self-prune those branches. They can't get sunlight, they just die and fall off, but the tree stays alive. You take that same lodgepole and put it out by itself in the middle somewhere where it's got soil and water, it'll get big around. It'll get branches clear to the bottom. We got some of those around our visitor center. But they're skinny, they're tall, called lodgepole because they were used as lodgepoles for teepees by the Indians. Before the fire, we had some fir and spruce growing in here, some big Douglas fir, and we'll see some of those logs, and I'll point them out to you. They had started to move in. Now, this forest will grow new 50, 60, 70 years from now. It'll be 50, 60, 70 feet high, because it grows about a foot a year when it's got good soil and good water. And that'll be a good shade area for these spruce and fir to come in. And then the spruce and fir will come in, and for the next 200 years, they'll just kind of keep growing, and they'll crowd out the lodgepole. Eventually we'll have spruce and fir forest. And that whole cycle takes about 300 years.
Strawberries.
I would think so. Yeah.
Captain Barlow and Hayden. Probably up there on top of their horses. And we'll be over there. See the stream over there. And that's gonna be cold. So you're getting snow melted. What do you think? You wouldn't want to put your foot in there, would you? For very long. You can make it right. All right. Who's stick on it? But whoops, excuse me.
There you go. Now stick.
The easiest way to the top is across some of that cross deadfall up there, but where the green trees are, that's the gentlest way up. So just kind of pick your way going up there. Don't follow me. I always take the hard way. And this was a super volcano, not like the volcanoes you see in other places. This thing is 30 miles across. You go to Hawaii, it's about a mile or two across that crater. So there aren't very many of these in the world. That's our heat source. The water comes from rain and snow. A drop of water coming out today might have fallen as a drop of rain 100 years ago, and they're even saying 500 years ago. We've got some tritium tests they've done, the half-life of tritium, and I don't know just how to measure it. But anyway, that's what they're telling us, that this water might have fallen as rainwater or snow melt 500 years ago. So we got the water, we got the heat, and we got the rocks and cracks that make the vents bringing the water to the surface. Now, These little ponds were caused by a hydrothermal explosion. The ice, again, very deep, very hot in these places, made little lakes. The ice broke loose, the lakes drained out in a hurry, and when you take 300 feet of water off of an area that's putting a lot of pressure on 300 feet of water, when that drained out in a hurry, it's like taking the lid off the pressure cooker, and where that hot water was coming up through and that steam, it just exploded, and it made these holes. Now, these aren't very big. We've got one over here called Pocket Basin that's 2,600 feet long, 1,200 feet wide. They said the energy from that was equivalent to about 20 kilotons of TNT. Maybe as much as the first atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan. Now a little bit about that fire in 1988. What happened that spring? It was a wet spring, April, May, just as wet as, maybe a little more water than normal. When June got here, it started to dry up, and no one knew it was going to be the driest summer ever on record. We didn't get a drop of rain in Yellowstone in the month of June, July, or August. We had a fire policy in place, and that fire policy is still pretty much in place today. Fire starts naturally in this area. We'll study it, we'll let it burn till it goes out. See, natural fires allowed to burn if they weren't going to burn down some developed areas, if they weren't going to threaten lives and destroy power lines and that sort of thing. Each year, as lightning struck, usually it would hit a single tree. That tree would burn, it would go out. Or it might burn an acre, or it might burn 10 acres, it might burn 100 acres, but it would usually be put out because it would rain. 1988, with no rain, those fires started. We studied them. We said, okay, that can burn. It's not going anywhere. And it just kept burning. And well, the fires, finally, there were 50 of them that summer that started, and they somehow burned together and became 8 major fires. And they all had names. I don't remember the names, but I remember the name of this one was called the North Fork Fire. This fire burned half of what was burned that summer. This one fire alone. It started out in Idaho, outside the park in the National Forest. Started by a guy cutting wood. Put down a cigarette, that started the fire. He knew he'd started it. He fought it. He and his son lost control, went and found a forester, and the forester called in the troops, and they fought it for 2 or 3 days. It finally burned into Yellowstone across the boundary from National Forest to National Park. It started about the middle of July. By the 24th of July, it was advancing toward Old Faithful so fast, we were afraid we were going to have to evacuate the area, but the wind changed. As the fire got about 6 miles away here, it turned and started toward Madison Junction. One fire burned 400,000 acres. The fires in Yellowstone that summer burned 800,000. This alone burned half of what was burned. We fought that fire from the day it started. Now, people didn't understand that. They thought, oh, you let it go too long. You didn't get after it. But you know, you don't stop fires any more than you stop hurricanes or earthquakes or whatever. That fire then finally burned until September 11th. September 11th, it rained and snowed, a combination on September 11th, 25/100ths of an inch of moisture. That put the fires out. If it had that much rain any time during the summer, it probably would have done the same thing. But the fire was moving so fast, it would burn a tree, and all it would do is burn the needles off. And we watched some films later, kind of timed it. It took 23 seconds from the time the fire started out on the needles on the bottom of the tree till it reached the top. Just like a Roman candle, just whoosh. And those flames would just consume all those needles. Once the needles were gone, the tree was dead. The trees here in Yellowstone, 80% of them are lodgepole pine. And lodgepole pine make new cones every year. Well, a few of the lodgepole, not all of them, but some of them have serotinous cones. Not all the cones are serotinous, but some of them, about 20% of them. And the cone, serotinous cone is held together with resins, kind of glue-like stuff. And when that fire heats up that tree, it melts those resins, and after the fire's gone, 20 minutes later, those cones pop open and scatter seeds. Yellowstone will never be the same, and that's what we hear all the time. Yellowstone would never be the same if we hadn't had the fire. It changes year to year. It changes, century to century or millennium to millennium. It's constantly changing. Less than 5% of Yellowstone has been developed for roads and and places like Old Faithful, places to sleep and buy food, 5%. The rest is still a wild land. It's the largest wild land in North America. In fact, probably in the world, still like it was way back when time started. Elk go potty quite frequently because they're eating so much. They'll do 10 to 12 piles a day. There's about 120 pellets in a pile. We've got 30,000 elk in Yellowstone. Where's that math teacher? You're welcome. There's a view of Imperial not everybody gets. I just think it's just gorgeous from up here. Before we start down, you notice if we go straight over the edge here, it's pretty darn steep. It's pretty steep off the edge here, and you got a lot of loose rocks. So as you look down there, off to the right, there's kind of a mud of an earthquake. In 1959, Yellowstone was shaken with that earthquake. Somebody remember, it was a 7.3 on the Richter scale. The epicenter was just 25 miles from here, just outside of Yellowstone, in the Hebgen Basin there. But it shook Yellowstone, obviously, at 7.3, and made a lot of changes. And that happened 11:30 at night, so you couldn't really see much till the next morning. But they say as they came out the next morning, almost everything in the geyser basins were erupting. Get your picture. Careful coming through here, single file.
Walk through the trees.
After the fires of '88, all the burned area came alive with that fireweed. These hills were just pink everywhere. Beautiful. It's interesting because fireweed only grows where the area has been disturbed. If you know, from the fire it was disturbed, so the fireweed grew. You read about England being bombed, World War II, and immediately after the bombing, fireweed started to grow in those craters and things that have been created by the bombs. And it gave the British people a little hope, all those beautiful flowers, that maybe there was going to be some life after the war type of thing. The Indians would use this plant, Western yarrow, for medicinal purposes. When you mash that in your fingers and smell it, that leaf, it's got kind of a camphor smell. You talk about yarrow tea. I tried to make some yarrow tea once. It took a lot of leaves and it still wasn't very strong, but it didn't taste very good either. It's quite unsold. You read about them using this for sores in the mouth, canker, or whatever. They make a poultice to stop bleeding. So it does have some medicinal value, but Western yarrow. And I hope that I've enlightened you a little bit and got you thinking about what is so special here in Yellowstone and some of these things you remember for a long time.